name is Lindsay. It is so nice to see you guys. For those of you who are returning, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. And for those of you who are brand new, I really hope that you enjoy this content and that you find it helpful and inspiring. And if you do, I ask that you like, share, subscribe, comment, click the notification bell, all of those things that help the YouTube algorithm spit this out in front of all sorts of other new people so that they can find this channel and be blessed as well. Alright, let's just jump straight into the story that we have for today. So we are looking at Genesis chapter 39, and this is a bit more about Joseph. Now, we've talked a bunch about Joseph on this channel, but we're going to talk about him even more today. So for context, chapter 39 is... Alright, so chapter 37 is when we first see Joseph. He has just been betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery because he was his daddy's favorite and everyone knew it. And then we go and jump into chapter 38, which is a bit more about his brother Judah and some of the shenanigans that he got up to. And now we're back in chapter 39, and we're going to start deep diving into a bit more of Joseph's story as he's now in Egypt. So let's pick up in chapter 39, verse 1. It says, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. So it was, from the time that he had made him overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance." Okay, we're going to pause there and unpack it a little bit. So, a little bit of background context. So, we know that Joseph is Abraham's great-grandson. Okay, so Abraham was this guy who, out of everyone on the entire earth, God was like, I pick you, and because of you, I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to bless everyone else through you and your family. So actually, I think we see this in everyone down the line so far. We see this through Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob, and now through Joseph, that not just themselves are being blessed with, wealth and abundance and big families and all things like that, but also the people around them are actually being blessed by them, whether they are on board with that at the time or not. So in this instance, we're seeing quite a lot of blessing happening in this very short passage. And we've got Joseph now, who's been sold by his family and completely abandoned, rejected, what's the word I'm looking for, betrayed by his family. And he must be thinking, I've had these dreams of greatness and now they're not going to happen because slaves don't live a very long life. They're treated very poorly, they might not get fed enough, they might be beaten on a regular basis, they have no freedom. They're a slave, they're less than human, essentially, in, the eyes of basically everyone at the time. And so we've got Joseph now in this very humbled position, and despite the fact that he's been betrayed and he's now in a foreign land, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is not abandoning him. He hasn't said, oh, well, because you're no longer in the land of Canaan, or, you're no longer with your family, sorry, see you later. No, it says that the Lord was with him. And because of that, he was blessed. And because of that, he had favor. And because of that, everyone else around him was blessed and had favor. So, we actually see that he was a successful man, and this follows directly after it says that God was with him. That his success came directly from God being with him. And we can have that wherever we are as well. Wherever we are emotionally or physically, geographically, whatever it is that we're experiencing, God has said that I'm never going to leave you or forsake you. and he is faithful to keep to that promise. So we're seeing God's faithfulness right here. First thing, he hasn't left Joseph behind. He hasn't abandoned him just like everyone else has. And yeah, so he has favor and he has success. And his master saw, so we're in verse 3, that the Lord was with him and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. And so remembering now that his master is essentially Pharaoh's bodyguard, chief bodyguard, and in charge of his entire intelligence agency, right? So he's like in charge of the FBI and he's in charge of the police. Like he is literally the highest. He's a pretty high-ranking official. He's got a lot on his plate to think about, and he doesn't need to have warriors at home. And so when he sees that there's this young slave who seems to be really successful, and despite the fact that he can't even speak Egyptian probably at first, and all these different things, that he's got this God who must be blessing him because everything he does prospers. He's like, you know what, I don't know what's going on with this kid. There's obviously a God behind it, and I want that God to bless me. So I'm going to put Joseph in charge of all my stuff. And that's what he does. And because he does that, because he gives more things to come under Joseph's authority, all of those things are blessed as well, even more so, because now Joseph is able to strategize with the Holy Spirit and make the entire possession that Potiphar has, like all of his houses, all of his holiday homes, all of his businesses, like all the crops, all the weaving, all of whatever it is that he's got going on at this estate. Now Joseph is in charge of getting all of that, extra Holy Spirit juice going into all of those endeavors and making it really a lot more successful. And so yeah, that's what happens, and he is just exponentially growing the wealth of Potiphar. And Potiphar at the end, he says, like, I don't even know what I've got except for what is right in front of me. Like, I've got food, that's all I care about. Like, he might be going on his river cruise and say, I think that's probably my house. Very likely, because Joseph's in charge. Like, I don't know what I've got anymore. I'll let him deal with the bookkeeping and everything. So there's a lot of trust being placed in Joseph by his master. And you can imagine that, if Joseph, who was a slave, he's come from being a prince, now he's a slave, now he's receiving a lot of favor from his boss, and receiving a lot of promotion and just a lot of praise and a lot of, you're doing a great job, kid. You can imagine that he has a lot of trust and respect and love for his master as well. Like, I wouldn't be, so keen on having a boss or a master or whatever who didn't appreciate my efforts or, the fact that I'm there or whatever. But if I have a boss who is like, yeah, your God is blessing you, I'm going to give you a promotion, all these things, like, obviously I would be like, definitely, I like this guy, he's a good boss, let's hang out more if that's okay. And so there is this really great working relationship between Joseph and Potiphar, that might even be forming more of a personal relationship as well. Potiphar obviously clearly respects and loves this slave of his to give him such promotion, so there might be more of a trust that is being built between the two of them. And so what happens next? Obviously we've seen that Joseph is not only blessed with being a blessing, but he's also blessed with being really handsome. Unfortunately, sometimes a lot of blessing can bring the wrong kind of attention, and that's what he got. So you can't pick and choose what kind of attention you get when you're blessed. You get a mixed bag. And Potiphar's a great guy, his wife is not so much a great woman. And so she comes and checks him out, and she's like, you know what, I want a piece of this, and decides, hey, I want to sleep with this guy. She's clearly a pagan, doesn't have, God-fearing kind of morals that take morality and God's laws into account. The Egyptian gods didn't really care what you did so long as you went and bowed to them every feast day and gave the right sacrifices and whatever. That's essentially what the priest said would make them happy. obviously they're made of, stone and wood and whatever else. They didn't actually care. They had no brain or whatever to care. But the religion had no moral obligations on the adherence to the religion of the Egyptians, whereas our God has a moral law that we need to actually uphold. And Joseph knows that, but Potiphar's wife doesn't, and doesn't really care either way. She has no understanding of her moral obligation to anybody. And she's a very wealthy woman. She doesn't answer to anyone. And now she just wants to do her own thing in this aspect as well. But Joseph, the slave in this situation, is like, no, we're not going to do that. And so she harasses him, sexually harasses him, literally every day for ages. We don't know exactly how long this is going on, but can you imagine a young man being offered sex on a daily basis and he's turning it down? Like, that is a lot of, character. That is a lot of character, and that's a lot of the Holy Spirit helping him. Now, we see after a little while, this is going on for ages, and he says to her, he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me, but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And so he's like, I am very content with what I've got. I don't need to add any trouble to this, and I certainly don't need to break my master's trust, and I don't need to be breaking God's trust either. Like, he's come so high in the estimation and the blessing from God, and as well as the estimation and blessing from his master, that to do this one thing would actually topple all of that, really. And he says, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to sin against God. And she's still harassing him, and then one day she catches him alone, and he refuses, he runs away. She's caught onto his clothes, she held onto them and screamed and made this rape allegation, saying he tried to rape me, he tried to mock me. And when her husband Potiphar comes home, he obviously loves his wife, and when she says this, he's just wanting to protect her, and flies into this rage and throws Joseph into prison. He must be completely heartbroken that Joseph would betray him in this way. Like, Joseph has been betrayed. He can see the betrayal in his master's eyes, but he doesn't defend himself. He doesn't say, no, your wife is actually lying and she's been trying to harass me for ages now. Like, he doesn't actually throw his master's wife under the bus. He just actually takes the accusation wordlessly and doesn't do anything with it. He probably would have had the power to say, hey, look, this is what's been going on the whole time, but that would have torn his master's relationship apart, his marriage apart, and it probably would have had further ramifications on a political scale, because if Potiphar was this wealthy, then he probably married some other wealthy person's daughter, and if there was some kind of marital breakdown, that would probably have caused a lot of political rivalry that wasn't necessary, and could have actually been destructive to Egypt if Joseph had spoken up. Like, it doesn't say that in the Bible, but if you look at the culture, if you look at the context, that is very likely something that would have been a consideration for Joseph. He was so faithful to his master that he didn't want to bring in any kind of controversy, despite the fact that he was being accused of rape. And that's something that he could have been killed for on the spot if Potiphar really wanted to. He was a slave. He could have been killed for not bringing the food on time or whatever if they wanted to, and nobody would have blinked. But we see that Potiphar throws him in prison. And now, prison in those days is not like prison that we have today. Prison in those days was a holding cell until your case goes in front of court or something, or until your master decides what he wants to do with you, and then you either get executed or you get sent off the salt mines or whatever it was, and you're never heard of again. But we see that Joseph is actually stuck there for years, and we think it might be about 3 years that he gets stuck in there. And because of this, because of the indecisiveness of Potiphar, we can actually see that there is still a great deal of trust left that Potiphar has for Joseph. But he doesn't want to actually speak up and do anything about it, because he's like, I love my servant, but I can probably see that my wife might have actually done something that she shouldn't have been doing, and I can't be caught in the middle. And so Joseph is just left in limbo for ages. And so Joseph is stuck in prison, which was so unusual for anybody in the entire world to be left in prison for years on end with no end in sight. And yet he's there, and when he is there, guess what? He's now been abandoned, rejected, betrayed, and thrown into prison that is even worse than slavery. He can't even go out and see the sunshine and just live a normal life, a somewhat normal life. He's now stuck in this dingy, dark cell with a couple of criminals coming in and out every other day, and the master of the prison decides that he wants to have favor with Joseph. And so let's have a look at that. So we're in verse 21. So, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So even here we see that the Lord has not left him. The Lord is still with him, even in prison. Even when he has been falsely accused and he's been betrayed again, and now he is in prison, he's like, you know what, I'm going to have mercy on Joseph, and I'm going to give him favor with the guy in charge here. And so the guy in charge of the prison gives everything about the running of the prison over to Joseph to look after. It says that if there was anything that needed to be done, it was basically Joseph's job to do it. So he was in charge, and the guy in charge of the prison is kind of just palming off all of his responsibilities onto Joseph. He has so much favor everywhere he goes just because God is with him. And that's where we're going to leave it today. I just want you to know, no matter how far you think you've fallen in life, God is still with you. He will not forsake you. This past week, I've been meditating on the song Great Is Thy Faithfulness, like thinking about it and letting it just sort of run through me this whole week. And the words are, great is your faithfulness, there is no shadow of turning with you. So God, when he says something, when he makes a promise, he's never going to break that promise. If he says, I'm with you, even to the end of the age, which he does in the Bible, he means that. He's going to be with you. He is with you, no matter where you are. If you are listening to this from prison somehow, I'm not sure how that works, or if you are in a position where you feel like you've been betrayed over and over again, if God has made you a promise, he is going to come through on that. You can be sure. Okay, so I want you to know that if you are finding favor in your life, if you are in a really dingy position in life, no matter where you are, God is with you and he will continue to bless you. But I also want you to be aware that Joseph's character helped him out at the same time. We see that with the situation with Potiphar's wife, Joseph had the opportunity to break trust with his master and to break trust with God, but he didn't want to do that. He hung in there. He didn't commit sin, even though in the end it meant he would have a worse off fate, essentially. He could have been selfish and done things his own way, but because he didn't, because he followed the moral law that he knew that God had as a moral obligation on his life, because he maintained integrity despite everyone else around him going, there is absolutely no moral obligation, what are you talking about? Because he maintained that integrity, we can see that is actually probably part of the reason why God was blessing him in the first place. Like, yes, God says, I'm going to be with you wherever you go, but sometimes if our character is not being developed, if we are not choosing to live up to the high calling that God has on our lives, that can sometimes tie God's hands a bit. Like, he wants to bless us. He really, really wants to bless us. But we see that God was able to bless Joseph because there was a higher level of good character in Joseph's life. So I also want to encourage you that yes, God's going to be with you wherever you go, but also help him out as best as you can by maintaining and growing in good character. God has given us the 10 Commandments, right? They have not been done away with. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and all those things. Is the first 4 parts of the first 4 commandments are about how we can love God, and the last 6 commandments are about how we can love others, right? So if we can continue to grow and have the Holy Spirit help us to be more like Jesus and to live up to these moral codes of love, right? If we can learn to love others and live according to God's law of love, then the closer that we are to that ideal, it's more likely that we're not tying God's hands to help us. Okay, I know that this has gone a little bit of a different direction towards the end, but I really want you to get that. You can't just be living and saying that you're a Christian and expecting God to bless you if you're not also growing in him, if you're not also maintaining that relationship. Because when you are in a close, loving relationship with God, the moral law obligation is going to come naturally out of your life. It's going to be an outworking of the Holy Spirit in your life. It's not something you strive for. It's not something that you do to get salvation. It's something you do because you have salvation already. It's what you do because you are in relationship with God already. Joseph was in relationship with God. He trusted God despite the fact that he was betrayed over and over. And because he was in this relationship that God had initiated, God said, hey, I'm going to be with your family and I'm going to be with you and I'm not leaving you. Because he maintained that relationship, God was able to bless him. God wanted to bless him. He wants to bless all of us. He says he wanted to bless Abraham and everyone in the whole world through Abraham and his descendants. He wants to bless all of us, whether we know him or not. But let's do what we can to make it a little bit easier and not get ourselves into worse situations because of bad moral decisions. Okay? This is a tricky one to balance right. But I really need you to know that it's an outworking of the Holy Spirit, and it's because of grace that we live lives that reflect Jesus' character. Okay? That's where I'm going to leave it for you guys today. Also, I will link in the description below if you want to check out a sermon that I preached this past weekend. It's on another YouTube channel, and you can go and check it out in the link in the description. Alright, I will see you guys all next Friday. Bye!